Welcome to the Mercy Cast, where we're learning the art of compassion through the adversity of life. I am your host, Raleigh Sadler. I'm not sure we've ever dedicated an episode to singleness. And there's probably a reason, because singleness can be hard to talk about, especially for those of us who are single. And it's not that we're afraid to talk about it. We just don't exactly trust the people we're talking to, because sometimes people are very well-meaning. They're so well-meaning. But as they talk to you about your singleness, there's this question in the back of their mind, and sometimes in the front of their mouth. Sometimes they will actually say it. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you married? But you're such a nice guy. Or you're such an attractive woman. Or you're such a good person. Why has no one snatched you up? And I know that these people are trying to be helpful. And maybe these well-meaning people actually care. There's a good chance they do. But sometimes when you as a single person walk away from these conversations, you feel very confused. And you start questioning, is there something wrong with me? Some people, they're not as kind. Some people look at you as a single and they're like, you need to work on this and then you'll get married. And then almost equating singleness with weirdness. I am going to go on record right here, right now, today, and say some of the weirdest people I've met have been people who are married. Doesn't mean every married person is weird, by no means. I want to encourage you, but I've also met some weird single people. But my point is, by virtue of the human condition, you got a little on you. You're a little different. You can be a little strange. You can be that guy who talks too loud at the party. You can be that guy who talks during a movie. You can do weird things. And I know I only mentioned two things, but single people aren't the only people with the capacity for weirdness. And I think we need to really look into that. And so, yes, today we're going to talk about singleness. And I'm really excited because so many of our listeners, they're wrestling with this. Ryan is single. He had a lot of conversations with a lot of people. And then one day, he finds himself sitting in his car and he's asking himself something that he probably never wanted to ask himself. He's asking himself, is there something wrong with me? Ryan Wekenman is the teaching pastor at Red Rocks, Austin, and the author of the new book, Single Today: Conquer Yesterday's Regrets, Ditch Tomorrow's Worries, and Thrive Where You Are. And he's the host of the Single Today podcast. Ryan, welcome to the Mercy Cast.
My goodness, what an introduction. I almost wanted to just put that as the intro, the forward of my Audible version of Single Today. That was so good. He had me muted and I'm just here in my office just cracking up the whole time. It was so spot on. Well done.
There was feeling behind that.
There was emotion. I felt it.
Oh,
man.
You're sitting in your car, man, and you're thinking, is there something wrong with me? And I resonate with this because if you don't think that, someone's going to think it for you, and they're going to ask, well, what's wrong with you? And then when you hear that, you start thinking, man, is there something wrong with me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you come to an answer?
I did. And the answer is yes. There's a whole bunch of things wrong with me. Spoiler alert. And that's kind of the point, right? Is we're all just a bunch of broken, imperfect people. But no, like at a deeper level, first off, that question presupposes that there's like a right way to do this whole thing. You know, like there's a time frame to get married and all of that. That's just not true. But that question, is there something wrong with me, took me on a several year journey of actually doing the inner work and going to counseling for the first time, or spiritual direction for the first time, having like deep conversations with friends, learning how to ask the question internally, hey, how am I feeling right now? Where is this anger coming from? Where is this shame coming from? Learning to invite people into the conversation, realizing that I'm single, but I'm not alone. And that it's not good for man to be alone, which means we need to surround ourselves, especially when we're single, with community of people who can be with us. So long story short, that question ended up being a beautiful gift for me, because it was like an entryway into a deep inner journey. And that's really the driving question of the Single Today book. I keep coming back to that question as I kind of share with the reader the journey that I went on.
One of my most trusted mentors that I've had over the last 20 years is a man by the name of Louis Clark. And Louis Clark wrote a book called Imitating Jesus, and he really talks about community. He talks about bringing people in to this spiritual family and doing life together in a very real way, not necessarily a manufactured way, not like just really just doing life together in a way that changes our lives forever. And what I love about Louis is Louis not married. He's in his 60s, he's single, and he's not alone. I think you really keyed in on something there, because oftentimes when we're dating, we're not necessarily dating for a spouse. We're just looking for community. And if we're not self-aware of that, that can really confuse our dating life, because you can have community and not be married. And I've met a lot of married people who are married without community. People who would say, I'm more lonely than I've ever been.
Totally. Yeah, just like your riff on weirdness, that there's weird singles and weird married people. There's also lonely single people and lonely married people. That loneliness seems to be at a deeper level than whether or not you have somebody in your corner, whether or not you have plans on Friday night. Loneliness seems to be like a heart posture deep down that we can actually, and I feel like I'm in the process of inviting God into, of realizing, oh, God actually is like, God calls himself Emmanuel, the God with us. That God is always with us everywhere we go, which means we're actually never alone. And when we start to get that, and then we add the extra layer of realizing how important it is to have people in our lives, community in our lives, people that we're willing to be vulnerable with and who are willing to be vulnerable with us, I think that takes so much of the pressure that people put on modern day dating, and it like lets all of the air out of the balloon. Because you realize like the things that you're actually looking for, you can find in God, you can find in community. And now if marriage is a desire for you, then go pursue it, because it's a beautiful God-given thing that he designed us for. But we just put so much pressure on it. I don't know. That has been my experience and my experience from meeting with a lot of single people over the years. So I don't know if you resonate with any of that.
Well, I do, because when you kind of take the pressure off, and you say, you know what, I'm getting my needs met in community. And so now I don't have to be married to have significance. I don't even have to be in a relationship, because I have relationships. Then that actually frees you, because now you're not being that person who's desperate and just flinging yourself into weirdness. You're able to say, cool, like I'm going to get to know this person. We're going to have coffee and it's going to be nice, or it's not going to be nice. But regardless, it doesn't have to be weird.
Yeah. And you don't have to decide if you're going to spend the rest of your life together by the time you finish your Americano. Right?
And that is a thing, because you will go out with people, you'll get to know them, and you'll realize very quickly kind of the posture that each person's taking. Because some people, they're going to be moving fast. Some people are going to be moving slow. Sometimes those of us who've moved fast in the past will move slow, and vice versa. But in that first date or second date, I think it's such a good opportunity to just listen to someone else who's on the same journey. Because we're out here just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that feels really important. Feels like there's someone listening that just needs an exhale when it comes to dating, and just a reminder that it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
And that it's okay. And it's good to just ask questions and show up ready to learn about somebody. And if it doesn't work out, it's okay. It's okay.
And you mentioned this, and I don't want us to gloss over it, but you mentioned inviting God into our singleness. What does that look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there is a special grace for single people available. And by the way, I also believe there's a special grace for engaged people available, and a special grace for married people available. It has less to do with life stage and more to do with the fact that I believe that God meets us right where we're at. For single people specifically, loneliness is a big piece of it. Feeling isolated is a big piece of it. Not having somebody at the end of your day who's asking you about your day and you asking them about theirs. And so there are a lot of isolated, lonely moments. And I just believe that those moments provide it feels like an obstacle, but you can turn that obstacle into an opportunity to connect with God at a deeper level, to invite him into that space and really connect with your creator. And it's difficult because everything inside of us just wants to numb those feelings that we're feeling. That's why we turn to whatever your drug of choice is to just try to feel okay. But I think that those are actually opportunities to go, okay, God, hey, I feel really lonely right now. And so I'm just going to be really honest about that. And I'm going to invite you into that. And I don't even really know what that looks like, but I want to just let you know. And I want to talk to you about that. I feel like those are really sweet moments that historically I've missed a lot of those nights and just like punted on that and watched The Office and just tried to, which is great. And that's fine. But I do feel like one of my jobs is to encourage people and invite people to take advantage of those times of loneliness, to invite God into them.
We have that feeling of loneliness. We so want something, but we can't live in this transitional period where we don't have it. And then it's generally at that time when someone comes up to us and says, you know what? Maybe you have the gift of singleness. What do you do with that? Because for me, that was like a gift I wanted to trade back in. It was like that gift you get on Christmas Day where you're like, can I exchange this? Because
where's
the
gift receipt?
This is a white elephant gift. This is a white elephant gift. This is something that someone got, they've been holding on to. They put it in their garage. It's gathered dust. Now they repackage it and they give it back to me. But what do you do with this whole idea of the gift of singleness?
That's so good. Yeah, it feels like anything but a gift at that moment, right? And it's funny. As a pastor, like there are so many times where I've been in rooms with people as they're filling out their spiritual gifts assessment, which is a whole another podcast for another day. But you feel this like anxiety in the room of like, please not singleness, please not singleness, please not singleness. Which I always say, if that's how you feel, like a gift is supposed to feel like a gift. And so what I've had to learn how to do is flip that. Hey, Ryan, do you have the gift of singleness? Because let's be honest, what people are really asking is, do you think you'll be single for the rest of your life? They'll say, hey, are you living that Paul life? Do you feel like you have the gift of singleness? And what I've had to learn how to get to the point of realizing is, first off, how could I ever know the answer to that question? Like we approach Christianity sometimes like you get saved on Sunday and then on Monday, there's like a 3-ring binder on your desk that's like, okay, here are all the jobs you're going to have for the next 50 years. Here are the places you're going to live. Here's who you're going to marry. Here's how many kids you're going to have. Here's how many grandkids you're going to have. Here's what's going to happen in 2053. And if you have any questions, here's Gabriel's number and he'll be right there. You just got to ask him and he'll come answer those questions. And it's just not true. Like, meanwhile, Jesus said things like, don't worry about tomorrow. Be present today. And so this whole single today journey, this book that I wrote, it all spurred out of that mentality of like people asking, hey, do you have the gift of singleness? And me freaking out going, oh, does this mean I'm going to be single the rest of my life? And then one day I realized, wait a second, I'm single today, which means that today singleness is a gift. In other words, my life stage of being single presents all sorts of amazing opportunities for me to take advantage of if I would just let go of tomorrow and trust that God's going to be with me when I get there, and instead focus on today. And so that was a long-winded answer. My simple answer is, when people say, do you have the gift of singleness? I say, singleness is a gift.
Nice.
And I say that to hopefully help them see that singleness is a gift for them as well. And by the way, so is marriage. Children are a gift. At like every life stage that you're in, it is a gift. You just have to learn how to reframe it.
You mentioned this idea of looking forward rather than looking in the mirror, rather than being present. You're kind of living in the future. You're worrying about, when am I going to get married? When am I going to have kids? Is it going to be enough? And what's interesting is when I talk to my friends who are married, they'll be like, I get that. But what I found is we got married and didn't have a child. And so everyone's like, when are you going to have a kid? And then we got married and had one kid. And then they're like, well, when are you going to have a big family?
Wow.
We will never be enough to meet the expectations of those around us. I don't think we will ever do it. And when we're living to meet those expectations, you can't be present. You can't be in the moment. And so how do you switch from this future orientation to this present mindedness?
That's such a good question. There's so many layers to it, right? First off, I totally agree. It's the same thing with dating. You go on a couple of dates and then all of a sudden people are like, so like, is she the one? And then you propose and you get like 15 minutes of celebrating with your family until everyone's like, so when's the date?
Right.
When's the wedding?
Right.
Like it truly, we are obsessed with the next step. And I think to your point, we're obsessed with the next step because we don't know how to be content with who we are today. And we don't know how to live fully in the moment with God today. And so what I've seen in my life is there are lots of ways to do this. And also that it's a lifelong process. I'm better some days at being present than others, especially like, man, just to be honest, right now, I'm in a really busy season. My very first book is launching and there's lots, how that process goes. There's lots that goes with it. And it's all like forward thinking stuff.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I'm on a whole new journey of trying to practice what I preached about in the book, ironically. There are some like really helpful steps that I have found to really embrace it. And the first is at anytime I call it the tomorrow trap. Anytime I feel myself get caught in the tomorrow trap, which I mean, like I'll usually be doing pretty good in the mornings. Like I'll wake up and I'll have my quiet time. I'll read my Bible. I'll get a workout in, a little prayer, a little meditation, whatever, be feeling good. And then around the time I leave my house, like all of the questions about tomorrow and next week and next year and all of that, it's like they just bombard my mind. And so what I'm learning to do, and this might be super helpful for somebody, is when I feel myself starting to get too future focused, I stop and I literally say out loud, I fell in the tomorrow trap. And just the act, you feel silly. Like my neighbors probably think I'm crazy. Like, why does Ryan always say he fell in the tomorrow trap? But just saying that out loud, it allows you to just name what's going on. And I'm at the point now where I don't know, like no condemnation, no shame on myself. I just go, oh, I'm doing it again. I fell in the tomorrow trap. And it's almost like just doing that is like, a hunter coming by and taking the trap, like one of those big bear traps that you got stuck in, off of your leg and being back to being in the present. And so it sounds so silly, but it's usually the most profound things are very simple. And so maybe you try that, whoever's listening to this right now, when you start getting too caught up in the future, go, I fell in the tomorrow trap. And then just watch yourself it's almost like just invite God to come in and take the tomorrow trap off of you and take a deep breath and realize that Jesus gives us a beautiful invitation to be present right here and right now.
Well, and it's also an exercise in self-awareness and self-acceptance. You're saying, okay, this is where I'm at right now.
Wow.
And you don't have to love where you are, but when you can acknowledge where you are, that's when you can change it. Yes, I just fell into the tomorrow trap. But on your subtitle, you say, conquer yesterday's regrets and ditch tomorrow's worries and thrive where you are. Yeah. So you're kind of painting a picture where there's kind of a ditch on either side. Like
totally.
So if we're not being present, if we're not being where we are at this moment, then it's very easy to get lost in our ruminations of what we coulda, shoulda, or maybe what we should have never done.
Wow.
We're living with that regret.
Wow.
or we're worried about the future. And I feel like those things are constantly at war to pull us into them. And how do we avoid that other side of yesterday's regrets?
Totally.
We've heard about the tomorrow trap.
Mm-hmm. You hit the nail on the head, right? Part 1 of this book is called Yesterday, and part 2 is called Tomorrow, and then part 3 is called Today. And so the first third is all about the shame from the past. Because let's be real, man, as single people, there's so many like coulda, shoulda, wouldas, the ones that got away. I shouldn't have sent that text, or I should have sent that text, or I can't believe that I did that, or I can't let myself off the hook for that thing. Whatever it is, there's all of this shame and regret from yesterday. And even when we know that somebody else has forgiven us, and even if we know that God has forgiven us, it can still be really hard to forgive ourselves, to let ourselves off the hook. And so, I resonate with that at a deep level. There's so many like pieces to this. I'm trying to figure out which one to go into. But I think one thing, just very practical, very basic. You're here, you're with us in this interview. I've noticed that gratitude goes a long way to ground us back in the present moment, especially when I get caught in yesterday, when I get caught in the past. Because usually when I'm caught in the past, it's because I'm not being grateful for what I have today. So like singleness is a great example of this. I start ruminating on a relationship or one that got away or whatever. And when I can stop and go, wait a second, look at all these opportunities that I have today. Look at all these things I get to do today. Look at all this extra time I have today. Look at how it sounds silly, but get to decorate this room however I want to decorate it today, which isn't true for you if you get married. When you start diving deep into gratitude in the present moment, it does wonders for pulling us out of the shame of yesterday. There's something like, maybe the lines like, it's really hard to stay stuck in yesterday when you're thankful for where you are today. Yeah, gratitude, I think would be one of the answers, but there's so many. Do you have any thoughts for that? How have you learned to move past yesterday?
It is a constant battle. And I've found with gratitude, it grounds you in that moment. And it also helps you see your past in a more forgiving light, a more gracious light, to where you might see the one that got away. And there have been times where I'll look at that and be like, you know what, man, I'm thankful. I'm thankful that I got to spend that amount of time with this person because I'm better for it. I mean, I didn't know how to dress my first 4 or 5 relationships. Yeah, I grew. And now I can look at it. And it's not necessarily me looking through a scarcity lens of, oh no, I got to cling to this because what if I don't ever get anything else? It's not that. Now it's more like, man, I had a great experience, whether it had been a long-term relationship or a short-term relationship. I got to walk with this person for a little while. And sure, we're human. We make mistakes. We can be hurt. We can hurt others. That's a real part of life. And it sucks. It's not cool. Like, it's not fun, but the wealth that I think we gain from that and how much we grow and learn and become a stronger person and a more healthier person as a result of challenges and conflict that we had to deal with in a just normal relationship. I think that's worth the price of admission. Even if you don't end up with that person for the rest of your life, the rest of your life is going to be different as a result of that person.
That's so well said. The truth is, somehow Romans 8:28 works. I don't understand how, but it says God's working all things together for the good of those who love him. And like a lot of that tapestry, I feel like we are too close to it to really see how it all goes. But man, even like rejection, like heartache, all of the stuff that is so painful in the moment, there's actually, I just believe, things to be grateful for in the midst of it. And eventually is a key word there, because if somebody's like going through a breakup right now listening to this, they're like, whatever, man. But eventually, I just believe we see that there are gifts given and gifts for us to receive in every stage of life, even in the difficult moments, or maybe especially in the difficult moments.
You know, what's interesting is singleness looks different when you're in different seasons of your life. So if you've never dated someone, you might have a different view of singleness than if you had just got out of a relationship.
Right.
You go through a breakup and you're like, I got to get back into a relationship, because it's like walking out of a warm house into the cold night and you're like, I don't have a jacket. I'm freezing out here. I don't. But taking that step back and saying, okay, who am I? Whose am I?
Yeah.
What can I be grateful for right now? Can keep us from rushing things, enforcing things, and settling for things that maybe we're not supposed to settle for.
Wow.
What do you think about that?
I think that's incredibly profound and incredibly well said. And part of the reason why there seems to just be, I feel like anxiety is like the soundtrack of modern day dating.
Yeah.
There's like beneath the surface, like we used to have all these like beautiful love songs, and now we just have anxiety. There is this feeling that time is running out. There's this feeling that we better figure this out. And there's this feeling that there's something wrong with me until I do. And so let's move. And I just see, like, for me as a follower of Jesus, Jesus's pace was just much different than that. It was much slower than that. He was just seemingly much more present. And I think all of that comes back to, in Matthew 4, there's this beautiful story where Jesus gets baptized. Maybe it's Matthew 3. Jesus gets baptized and he comes up out of the water, and you hear from heaven God say, "This is my son with whom I am well pleased." And what I've always loved about that is that happens before Jesus does any of the ministry that we have recorded, before he opens up any eyes of the blind or heals any bad relationships or casts out any demons or any of that. God goes, "That's my son with whom I am well pleased." And I think the lie that gets into our heads is, once I'm married, then God will look at me and say, "Oh, that's my son," or "That's my daughter with whom I am well pleased." And I think what we have to realize is, right now, before you have that next date, or before that successful relationship, or before that wedding ring, or before that family, or before any of that, right here, right now in this moment, God looks at you and says, "Hey, you are my son. You are my daughter. With you, I am well pleased." And I'm not saying that's easy. And I'm not saying that I get that. I'm not saying I bat 1,000 with that, all the time.
Right.
It's certainly a work in progress. But I am very convinced that when we can allow ourselves to actually believe that, like at a deep soul level, to believe that we're okay, a lot of the stuff we stress out about, especially when it comes to relationships or lack thereof, loses a lot of its power. Does that resonate with you at all? Make any sense?
Well, it flips the script, right? Because when you do not think you are loved and you think God is far from you, you're going to try to get that love anywhere you can.
Wow.
And when you take that into a potential relationship or even on a coffee date, you're not setting yourself or the person that you're with up for success. And success being a healthy relationship or even a healthy moment. At this point, you are a consumer. At this point, you are trying to get this thing that you crave. And it's less about knowing the person and more about getting rid of this feeling that you hate.
Yeah.
But like what you said, when you know that God is pleased with you, man, you're dealing with house money at this point. Now you're going in and you're just saying, "Hey, all right, however this goes, it's going to go." It might be good, it might be bad. We'll see.
That's so.
But
I wonder
I'm
if
free.
No, sorry. Go.
No.
I was just gonna say, I wonder if house money, seems like there was something on that when you said that. I wonder if somebody listening to this, maybe somebody's listening to this on their way to a date and they're nervous right now or whatever. I wonder if house money is the the takeaway that you go into this date with, where you literally sit in your car before the date and you take a deep breath and you realize that God says over you, this is my son or this is my daughter with whom I am well pleased. I don't have to find that love in this relationship working out. And then from there, realize that the pursuit of a healthy marriage is a good, God honoring thing that you should just go into and have fun with, playing with house money. So I wonder if you take a breath, you realize that and you go, I'm playing with house money today. And then you go enjoy your date and just see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, and it's so easy to say, but it ultimately comes down to faith. I mean,
wow.
Faith in that I am loved and that God is lavishing me with his love, his grace consistently, whether I see it or not. And yeah, I think if we come in that way, which isn't always easy, and it's not apathy either. It's just more of we're just trusting that no matter what happens, God's got us. I would be interested in the listeners responding to us and letting us know, like, how does this go when you go out with someone? If you're looking at it from the house money perspective, tell us about your experience because I want to know.
Yeah, me too. I feel like other people's expectations will have a lot less power over you. Like if somebody's asking you to compromise your values and you go, I don't want to do that, but I definitely don't want to get rejected or to not be loved. And so I guess I'll just compromise these values. That goes out the door when you realize that you're already loved and you realize like, oh, actually, I know who I am and I know what I'm about. And so I don't need to do that. I don't need to compromise in that way. And if that person's not okay with that, then it's clearly not a good fit anyways. But I'm okay with walking away from this because I know who I already am. Like, I just feel like that little line will change a whole lot for people.
What I've noticed is that as someone who's been in ministry for many years, I have been in different regions of the United States, and certain regions, singleness looks different than others. In New York City, everyone's basically single till they're 75. I mean, you don't get married till you're about towards the grave. Like, that's just how we do it here. You know, it's an approach. Yeah. But I recently moved back to Florida and it's much different there. There, I started getting the questions, well, why aren't you married? Are you afraid of commitment? Yeah. You know, questions like that. And they always come out of the blue. It's not generally in like a normal conversation where we're talking about that. We're talking about baseball. And then people are like, what's wrong with you that you're not married?
Like, how did you get there?
Yeah, you know, and I've had my moments where I've been defensive about it, but now I just expect it. Now I'm like, okay, in this region, someone who's my age and single, this doesn't fit most people's paradigms.
Right.
And that's okay. That still doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with me or anyone else who's single.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's why I think a lot of people move to the cities because there's a little bit more freedom there.
Yeah. And I think to just speak into what some of the anxiety, where some of the anxiety is coming from, at least for me, is I always feel like as the single person, I'm like a conversation ender. You know, like I'll sit down with somebody on a plane. You know, when you sit next to one of those extroverts on the plane who's just chomping at the bit to talk to you. And they'll start telling you like, oh, here's why I'm going to such and such place. I'm going to see my kids and my grandkid and blah, blah, blah. And they'll be talking. And then as humans do, they'll throw the conversation back to you and they'll say, what about you? Are you going to see your family? You know? And at that point, I still to this day get a little nervous because I'm like, now I'm going to tell him, actually, I'm single. And it's just going to end up being this like cul-de-sac, this like conversation ender where he's going to go, oh, okay, I'm sorry. And then like put his headphones in and it's going to be over, you know? And I think that as single people, we can also learn to flip the script on that moment where we can go, hey, how about instead of letting this be a conversation ender, we turn it into a conversation starter where when somebody asks me if I'm married or if I have kids, instead of just saying no, I learned to say, like, for me, this is my line, and you have to tailor make this for your own situation. I go, actually, I've been a single pastor for over a decade now, which I know is a really unique calling on a unique space, but it actually opens up the door and the opportunity for me to have all sorts of interesting conversations and meet all sorts of interesting people. And so what I'm doing there is I'm putting the ball back in his court. Now he has 5 different questions that he can ask me. And it's a subtle shift, it's a very subtle shift, but I've noticed over the years that making that subtle shift alleviates a lot of the pressure off of my shoulders, where I go, oh no, I'm going to be the conversation ender. I'm going to be the socially awkward guy. This guy's going to hate me. When you learn how to flip that and go, how can I respond to this question in a way that opens the door to 5 other questions? Then all of a sudden you realize that singleness is a gift to this conversation. Does that make sense?
It does. And you mentioned this idea of being a single pastor. And this is something that has always intrigued me, because we see biblically that many of our heroes of the faith have been single.
Yeah.
Whether it be Paul, whether it be Jesus, it's a pretty big hero. And
2 pretty big ones.
Yeah, so you got those 2. And then you have to live with this confusing reality that there's a good chance, if you're single, that you will be passed up for pastoral jobs in churches.
Yeah.
There have been many jobs that I was actually told the reason we didn't hire you is because you're single. If you had only been married. And so what has that been like for you, being a pastor who's single, but you're also ministering to singles, marrieds, your families, you're ministering to everyone. What has that been like?
It's such a good question. I'm sorry that happened to you. I hear those stories all the time. I've been spoiled in my ministry career to have leaders in my life who have championed me as a single pastor, but I hear those stories often. But I have had to constantly go into conversations with, especially married, like parents with kids who show up to the church, and they hear me preach, and then I meet them after, and then they find out that I'm single. There's usually, I bet you've experienced something similar, there's usually like this guy doesn't actually have anything that he can teach us, kind of a feel to it.
That's right.
And I've just it used to be a point of insecurity for me. And then one day I realized that the best thing you can do with your weaknesses is embrace them and double down on them. Like Paul writes about, it's actually when I'm weak that I'm strong. That this is actually an arena of authority that I can speak into, because to that dad who's been married for 30 years and has kids and all of that, he has been sanctified in a way that I have not. Having to be a husband, having to be a father, having to provide for a family. He's been sanctified in a way that I have not. But the truth is, I have been sanctified in a way that he has not. And that he probably got married at a young age. He probably knows very little about those feelings of loneliness, or those feelings of feeling like time's running out, or those existential questions of like, am I ever going to have kids? Like, he hasn't had to face those demons. And in those moments, you get to and have an opportunity to rely on God and allow God to be your strength. And so I've just learned how to double down on my weaknesses and run through them instead of away from them, and embrace it. It's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. Is I go, I'm just going to double down on who I am and celebrate it and be proud of myself, and trust that I'm going into this meeting with this married guy knowing that I'm carrying something that he is not, and that he needs me to shepherd him through. Yeah.
Double down on your weaknesses, owning who you are. This, I think, is the antidote to a lot of the anxiety that we experience as singles, because so much of it comes from comparison, right? We're comparing ourselves with everything that we're not. But if we own where we are and say, okay, I'm not married, I am single, that's where I'm at right now.
Wow.
I'm not going to fantasize about marriage. I can visualize, sure, but I'm not going to live somewhere where I'm not. Mm-hmm. And so what can I do as a single? I'm going to go take a trip. But it's my married friends who'll be like, man, I couldn't do that. And I'm like, well, you could travel. They're like, yeah, but I couldn't do that.
Mhm.
And it's in that moment where gratitude for me does well up because I'm thankful for where I'm at. I used to regret it. I used to hate it. And now I'm like, God is in control. And for those of us who are single, if we can just be thankful because we have so many opportunities that other people don't.
Yeah. Well said.
And honestly, a lot of our friends, I'm not going to out any of our friends, but I think a lot of our friends probably wonder sometimes, this isn't what I signed up for, you know?
Uh-huh.
Marriage is a beautiful thing, but sometimes singles are desiring to be married when some married people are just like, I wish I was still single.
Man, it's the old adage, the grass isn't greener on the other side, it's greener where you water it. It's realizing that every stage of life has amazing blessings and drastic challenges. And
that's right.
When you focus on the challenges, you just want to be somewhere else. But when you go, okay, I'm going to embrace the challenges as an opportunity to grow. And then I'm going to learn, to your point, to get really, really grateful for the opportunities that I do have. And to your point, I'm not going to wait for permission. I think this is a big one. Not waiting for someone to write you a permission slip to go work remotely from a different country. Because, right? Because you just did it. And one of the reasons I think single people stay stuck is because we don't want to make decisions. And so we're hoping that once we're married, somebody else will make those decisions for us. But then the problem is once you're married and you have kids, you can't do those things anyways. And so the solution, the antidote is to go, hey, I'm going to decide for myself right now that it's time to take this trip, or at least start saving up for it.
That's right.
Or whatever. And so, yeah, like we all have the single friend who's been talking about starting that business for 4 years and they're not anywhere closer to doing it. You know, or going to see the Northern Lights, but they haven't saved a penny any month, you know, for the last 4 years. It's like, no, you can just decide today that it's time to start taking steps in that direction.
Ryan, how would you encourage our listeners who they may be married or they may be single, but how can you encourage them to view singleness in a different light?
Yeah, that's so good. I would say, well, I start from a place of learning to celebrate exactly where you're at and learning to get out of the comparison trap. Because I think you hit on this just a second ago. I think one of the reasons we don't view singleness in a good light currently is because we can't stop thinking about all of our friends who are married. It's kind of, there's an interesting shift that happens. At some point for me, it happened in my 20s where all of my friends started getting married. And all of a sudden singleness went from like the fun thing that everyone was doing to like the not so fun thing that only I was doing. And you have to like realize in that moment that comparison it truly is a trap, that I have a journey that I'm on and that my married friends have a journey that they are on. And so if we can get out of the comparison trap, I think we can view singleness in light of all of the amazing gifts that it provides and the opportunities that it provides. Instead of a curse to endure, I think it's a gift to enjoy.
And I think that is just a beautiful way to look at it, because when we're just viewing life through the lens of what we don't have, we're missing what we have. And I know that sounds trite. I know it sounds cliche, but I think it's true. I think it's true. And so today, no matter where you are, whether you are single or you're married, know that you're loved.
Yeah.
And that's enough for today. That's enough for today. And then tomorrow, re-listen to this podcast and be reminded that you're loved.
Tomorrow will be today once you get there. So you'll be covered.
Exactly. Ryan, thanks so much for being on the show, man.
This is such a joy. You're such a good interviewer. And so thank you. Thanks for your vulnerability. Thanks for the good questions. Thanks for the space that you're creating for people. I'm a big fan.
Thanks, man.